Okay, next on our agenda we have Gonzalo Rada with AMEC Foster Wheeler Environment and Infrastructure. He's going to talk about what was just mentioned, the LTPP and pavement preservation. So I'd like to welcome Gonzalo. And do you have a presentation?
Thank you, Todd, and good afternoon to all. I'm delighted to be here, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity to talk about the design and hopefully implementation of a pavement preservation experiment for the long-term pavement performance, or LTPP program. Three areas that I'd like to cover during this presentation. I'll start with some background information about both the LTPP program and the project. I then would like to go a little bit into the approach to the experiment, which perhaps a little bit different than most would have anticipated, as well as some of the key considerations that went into the experiment as it presently stands. And then I'd like to finish the presentation just summarizing the experiment designs as well as the typical project layout. So with that, let me get started with the background. The long-term pavement performance program has as its formal mission increasing pavement life through research. From a practical viewpoint, what we're trying to do is to collect data so that we can understand how pavements perform and why they perform as they do. Now, when the program was established, the different experiments, which account for about 2,500 test sections, when the program was established, that took place mostly between late 1980s to about mid-1990s, all the different experiments, the SPS, the GPS experiments, and that remained until very recently. Within the past couple of years, Federal Highways has started to implement, to consider, and in one particular case, to implement new experiments. The new experiment that has been implemented is the warm mix asphalt, the SPS-10 experiment. The next one that is being considered, and again, I hope that it will be implemented, will be the SPS-10, the pavement preservation experiments. Now, the objective of the experiments, and hence the objectives of the project, are number one, to gather both short and long-term pavement performance data. With that data, we hope to be able to do a number of things, such as verifying that pavement preservation is a viable technology in extending pavement life. Also, we want to use that data to develop important tools, such as incorporation of pavement preservation within the mechanistic empirical pavement design guide. To accomplish those objectives, the project consists of 7 tasks in 2 phases. One of those tasks, we're finishing up phase 1 right now. The expert task group was mentioned. I will come back to it on the next slide. So the focus so far has been on the development of the experiment design and the material sampling and testing plans, and we're pretty much at that, finishing those activities, and that's really the focus of this presentation. Under phase 2, we'll address some very important things. They include performance monitoring requirements, construction guidelines, other data collection needs, as well as technical support and marketing of the pavement preservation experiment. Going back to the expert task group, it was established to provide review and feedback throughout the whole process. It will go on until the project is finished. As you can see here, we have a really, really nice group of very knowledgeable people in the area of pavement preservation. And I should apologize because Ben Worrell from MinRed should also be included here. He's a friend, but really a member of the ETG. Okay, so now moving on to the technical approach and the key considerations. And let me begin by saying that to be consistent with most of the other LTPP SPS experiments, we've divided pavement preservation into SPS-11, which is Asphalt Concrete Pavement Preservation Study, and SPS-12, which is the Portland Cement Concrete Pavement Preservation Study. Now the approach, what we're suggesting is segregating treatment types and pavement projects into discrete groups. Put another way, on a different way, basically what we're suggesting is we are going to apply the exact same treatment on the same pavement structure, but we're going to do that at different points in time. So I'll come back to this slide in a second, but I'm not sure how well you can see this, but for the SPS-11, that's Asphalt Concrete Pavement Preservation, what we're suggesting is we're going to have 6 sections. One of them is a control section where we do absolutely nothing. In the other 5 sections, we'll do whether it's a thin overlay or some of the treatments that I'll get into. That thin overlay we're going to apply to one section when the project is incorporated into the program. Then we're going to wait 2 years and we'll apply the same thin overlay on another section. Then we'll do the same thing at 4, at 6, and at 8 years. So exactly the same treatment on 5 different sections plus a control section, but applied at different points in time. I hope that makes sense. Does anybody have a question on that one? So basically, we're looking at timing. Timing is a very, very critical thing in the formulation of this experiment. Well, timing and the stress propagation rates. Now, this is perhaps not what most other groups are doing. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
How long are those test sections supposed to last? They all go to the same point in the end?
We'll collect data until they can no longer be maintained. I'm sorry. Maintained within the LTPP program. So basically, we like to collect data as long as possible until the agency decides this is no longer acceptable. Yes, sir.
How long are your test sections?
They are 500 feet. The very last slide gets to the test section, but they're all 500 feet. So where I left off is, this is a little bit different if you compare, for example, ANCAD and Main Road, where they have a lot of pavement preservation sections. All those sections are applied at the same time. So in a sense, you're comparing preservation treatment. So we're doing something a little bit different, but we think it's good. We think that this complements and supplements other studies such as ANCAD and M-Road. Now, talk about the 5 of the key considerations in putting together the experiments. The first one was treatment type. And in making this selection, we had the privilege of having survey results of agencies within the US and the Canadian provinces. So for asphalt pavements, the treatments recommended were thin overlays, chip seals, and microsurfacing. These were ranked like the first top 3 or top 4 treatments in the States. In the case of Portland cement concrete pavements, this was a little bit more interesting. The initial recommendation was diamond grinding, then dowel bar retrofit, and then surface hardeners. These documents were circulated to many people. In addition to the input from the ETG, we got input from many, many, many people. And it became clear that surface hardeners were perhaps not the right thing to move forward with. There was also the recommendation, do diamond grinding and dowel bar retrofit. They make sense, they're often done together, and I'll show you later in the presentation how that was done. And also, we got input from the concrete industry, basically said 2 of the key issues we have is joint sealants and joint penetrating sealers. So after going through all of this back and forth, those are the treatments that we have today. They haven't been finalized, approved. We're going through that process right now. But these are the treatments that are being looked at this point. Well, let me go back. Why 3? Basically, it was felt that from a budget viewpoint, budget constraints, et cetera, that this was a good number to target 3 different treatment types for each pavement.
So what is the point of the joint sealant? Are you trying to keep the water out, or are you trying to keep the hard stuff out of the joint?
We're actually trying to address a lot more questions. is it doing anything? Depending on climatic region, depending on traffic. Does it matter if you put it and you don't maintain it? Does it matter if you cap or if you remove and replace? So those are some of the things that we're trying to answer. In terms of pavement types, again, we would like to consider every single possibility, but the reality is that we've chosen one pavement type for each experiment. In the case of the SPS-11, we're looking at asphalt concrete overlays of existing asphalt pavements. And in the case of the SPS-12 Portland cement concrete pavements, we're only looking at jointed plain concrete pavements. So we love to study everything, but it really becomes a bit too much. In terms of climatic, I'm talking about the key considerations. In terms of climatic areas, we're basically looking at 4 scenarios based on precipitation and temperature. This is exactly the same as has been done with every other LTPP experiment. This is for right now in terms of grouping the projects into climatic zones. The real climatic zone will be based on real data. That real data perhaps could come from weather stations installed at the project, but most likely we are going to rely on MERA data. MERA data is data that is being collected via satellite. I think it stands for Modern Era Retrospective Research and Analysis data. It's NASA data, and it's really, really good. It's when LTPP started, we were looking at first order, second order weather stations to interpolate. We've done a study on this one, and it really works out great. So, in terms of traffic, for the SPS-11 asphalt concrete, we're going to do that based on both volumes. Threshold value we are using is 5,000 vehicles per day, which I think is what came out of the R26 report. And we're also going to use easels with 500,000 axles per year being the threshold values. For the SPS-12, we're only going to be using easels. The chart on the right, I don't know if you can see it very well, but that's basically if we separate volume and easels into 2 separate factors, we're doubling the number of projects needed for the experiment. So that was just a simplistic way of reducing the number of factors, keeping traffic as one factor. The last considerations, I'll go through these fairly quickly. Replicates are very, very important. So we like to have 2 replicates for each cell in the experimental matrix. That, of course, is going to depend on budgets, etc., but that's the idea. There are lots of repeat test sections within a project, so that's good. The number will decrease, but basically the idea is that we'll monitor every test section as we go through time. So lots of repeats, and supplemental test sections are really, really being highly encouraged. If an agency, for example, wants to try different thin overlay applications with tack code, with that tack code, point for half an inch, and so on, certainly encouraged within the program. The last thing, and this should be fairly quickly, that I wanted to talk about was the experimental designs and project layouts that will perhaps provide a bit more detail. This is the experimental matrix for the SPS-11 asphalt concrete experiment. You have basically what you're looking at here is 3 treatments that are covering 2 traffic levels and 2 climatic factors, moisture and precipitation. So in a sense, to complete this matrix, we would need 24 projects. We'd like to have 2 projects per cell, so that's where the 48 projects that Jason showed came from. So if we fill this experiment completely, that would be 48 projects throughout the country. This is the example that I gave earlier, a control section plus treatments applied at 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 years. Those are nominal figures. They could change. They could be accelerated or decelerated depending on how the payments are actually performing. In the case of the Portland cement concrete, here is the matrix, 3 treatments and the same factors as concrete. Now, this is the project layout for diamond grinding and DBR. There's a control section where we'll do absolutely nothing. If you go to the right, the next 2 sections, we will do diamond grinding on one of the sections. This is at year 0. Then we'll do diamond grinding and dowel bar retrofit on another section. This is year 0. 5 years later, if you go to the left side, we'll do the same thing, but 5 years later. Then we'll go back to the right side and do it 10 years. Now, where the sections go, this is just for illustration purposes. But basically, the idea is that you'll have diamond grinding and diamond grinding with dowel bar retrofit at year 0, 5, and 10. Again, those numbers can change. Did that make sense? In the case of the joint sealant and the joint sealers, this is going to be a little bit different as well. It's going to be a little bit unusual. We're going to have a control section where there will be absolutely no sealant. Then there's going to be a control section where the sealant is maintained. In other words, we'll be doing testing to make sure that the sealant is working. If it's not working or if something happened, it will be fixed. Then there will be a third control section where the sealant will be left as is and nothing else will happen. Now the idea is that we're going to do, at 5 years, we're going to cap. And on the other section, we're going to replace the seal. And we're going to do that the same, which is moving to the 2 sections on the left, and we're going to do the same thing at 10 years. I'm sorry, we're going to, on the right, we'll do that every 5 years. And to the ones on the left, we'll do every 10 years. Did that make sense? Yes, sir.
Some clarification here. So when we say year 0, we're going to go out and do a treatment year 0. That is year 0 when the payment is brand new. That is year 0 when the payments are.
Thank you. I should have made that clarification. Year 0 represents the time that the project is included in the LTPP program. Most of the payments that we're looking at, diamond grinding and dowel bar retrofit may be the exception, but most of the payments for the other 5 treatments, we're generally looking at around 4 to 6 years. We're looking at fairly young payments, but not 0, not time equal to 0.
So when we say 10 years, then that would be when the payment's 14 to 16 years old.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And the penetrating sealers, it's very similar in concept. We'll have 3 control sections. And then I'm looking at the right at year 0, we'll apply the sealer and we'll reapply it every 2 years. Then the next section, we'll apply it at year 0, but we won't apply it again. And then we'll do the same thing, but 5 years, and the spacing between the reapplication will increase to 5 years from 2 years. So. Anyways, we're trying to, I know I'm going fairly quickly through all of this, but we're trying to answer a lot of questions. Can we perfectly address joint sealants, for example? No, but we can certainly provide a lot of answers. Is the joint sealant doing anything for the pavement? Does it make a difference if it's maintained or not? Does it make a difference if it's capped or replaced? So there's a lot of, I think, a lot of valuable information that can be gathered from what is being suggested. Now, the question was about the section length, and this is what we're going to go with, 500 feet. 1,000 feet was considered, but since we're looking at, in the case of jointed plane, we're looking at fairly short slabs, so we should have anywhere from 30 to 35 joints or slabs, so I think we felt that there's enough numbers there. And for asphalt concrete is fine too. There will of course be a buffer area and sampling area, which is where most of the material sampling and testing will take place. So again, I think we're wrapping up phase 1. We've gotten lots of great input, and we should be done within, I'd say, the next month. Phase 2 has been approved, and we hope to start that very shortly. And project schedule, we hope to have phase 2 done in about a year. After that begins the recruitment process and continue to support federal highways with marketing and so on. So with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it again. Yes, sir.
How are the contractors going to be selected to put down the treatments?
It will be left to the agency. There will be specs and requirements provided as part of the guidelines, but I don't think federal highways will get involved with that. I think it will be the participating agencies. Any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.